what the functional equivalent means. The lawyers and keeping costing more time consuming litigation over questions about the court's new test make it difficult for regulated parties to predict whether they must seek a permit. The plan's modest increase in regulation solves the clarity significantly better for business than total regulatory retreat that's in Herman 18. American decision creates uncertainty that exposes the community to greater liability and costs on face of regulatory retreat may seem to benefit business. In reality, it would not deregulation risk uncertainty that the regulatory community disdains exempts like Hawaii wildlife have become more prevalent. Clear failure doesn't help businesses because private litigants bring citizens and lawsuits to enforce unpermitted discharges without an NPDS. Permitted discharges are explicit liability instead of revising prior statements should clarify groundwater prevent discharges with greater certainty that the community will benefit from unambiguous directives. Sometimes increase in system lawsuits regulating community and gain little firm APs anticipated retreat growing uncertainties exacerbated by changing administrations. For now, groundwater discharges are caught in the absurd situation either applying for a costly permit or rescinding system lawsuit absent in clarity regulating community remain pretty ambiguous statute. Otherwise cause stall economic recovery and constrain U.S. competitiveness internationally. That starts in 18. Overregulating due to pollution, overly complex, overburden, especially problematic for small businesses because they incur fixed costs. Burdensome regulations is of utmost importance to protecting processes that higher expected investment and improved business investment, lift the growth rate. Water pollution is extremely complex on lifetime again, lead bureaucracies and incurred high costs and is very litigious. High cost of compliance make American companies less competitive internationally. Post-COVID economic rebound secures geopolitical dominance. The alternative is global conflict, EU collapse, and Chinese authoritarian dominance. That's Chem 20. The race to growth will be an epic contest with geopolitical consequences. The post-COVID-19 race could determine whether the U.S. have retained the leadership, ambition, and leverage of faster recovery could determine whether the EU collapses, could trigger escalating conflict. So recovery laid the seeds for long-lasting shift in China. The U.S. regained the leadership as a convening power, being the first out of the gate will be significant. That is likely to be China. That goes nuclear. That's Allison 17. One rising power threatens the ruling power alarm should sound over being the past 500 years found 16 in which nations rises disrupted dominant state. The outcome necessitated world war. This is about the impact of the rise in China on the global order. The global space framework led by Washington to find a world order without war among great powers and increasingly powerful China is unraveling this and throwing into question peace. Leaders are driven by ambition that have hired national support at home. More important than sparks are structural factors, a condition in which otherwise manageable events can escalate when a rising power threatens the structural stress that makes a violent clash of the role that China's economic development is transforming into a formidable military competitor from current confrontations in SCS and ECS and cyberspace to a trade conflict that spirals out of control. It is easy to default scenarios of nuclear Armageddon. Ambiguity over the application of the functional equivalent test attacks the mining industry. That's Thomas Strick's from Shell said 20. American create uncertainty for mining functional equivalent tests provide little guidance and take their create uncertainty with penalties under this MBA can be seeped into the strict liability regime. Injecting less than clear tests destructive within 49 miles of traditional water might be subject to regulation. Regulated parties deal case by case basis where the cost of uncertainty are so great. Mining companies have been swept up in the immediate fallout, and environmental groups have already cited the ruling, especially REMs. It's I-13. Over Earth mining that approaches the gas and heavy metals and radioactive elements into groundwater. The U.S. is rebounding the REM market, but consistent expanding mining is key. That's Stephen 21. The U.S. very much on top of the player in where it's a supply chain underbiting efforts to renew the massive investment hardline in China that are about next 30 million securing domestic supply chain for REMs that are rebuild the entire supply chain to success depending on whether the U.S. can quickly scale processing and refining and compete on costs with the market dominated by China. The critical mineral shortages collapse tech primacy. That's Green 18. Minerals are the building blocks for military equipment. America's superiority hinges on reliable access to key materials. Without access, it is not their targets are and subs will sit and finish. America's minerals problem has gone from bad to worse. U.S. tech leadership solves every existential risk. That's J19. AI, 3D printing, genetic engineering, entering the RT, 5G, space, cyber, that all carry risks, autonomous weapons, turning their creators, that are result in human extinction, 3D printing, print WMD, spread guard space, and weapons proliferate, the engineered, supervised directed energy, undermining global stability, comes from risk, autocracy to win the new tech race. If China mastering technical and democratic war, this can lead to a rapid shift in the balance of power, upsetting global strategic stability. Chinese technological rise is demonstrably worse, causes global instability and conflict. It's Stab 21. If China remains an international order, it won't be pretty. The PRC will be demonstrably worse. China's the only competitor capable economic and technological power to amount to challenge the stable international system. The Uyghur genocide, the division is forced more than 1 million into camps tortured abuse forced labor. That's persecutions increase at the hundreds of thousands subjected to detention. The PRCs using mega databases to monitor every aspect of life and sanctioned subjects the Orwellian surveillance uncounted torture, seizing foreign lands and seizing waterways, leveraging the pandemic that is supposed to control the SNECS in fait accompli fashion. Hong Kong its first Taiwan sex building an authoritarian bloc that the PRC has the intention to build a new world order. The ally that has been unparalleled prosperity and remission of great power. The order reduce conflict and make cooperation with the possible China willing to use coercion. Liberal orders promoted peace, but it doesn't run on autopilot. The turning point either to present the order Beijing will transform index to sovereignty. TDF rectifies ambiguity by instituting a Hallmark clause and functional equivalent test that prevents case-by-case analysis and clearly prescribes when permits are needed. That's shift number 20. NW's not also potentially relevant fact is not satisfying to a point case-by-case basis. Hallmark clause and counting by indeterminate pollutants the hallmarks of having been omitted from point source conveyed through discernible confined and discrete conveyance and distributed functional equivalent clause to provide guidance to the lower courts, EPA, and the citizens.
Excellent. Oh, okay.
Okay, I'm good for crossing.
All right. Good.
Yep.
The Jane evidence is about genetic superbugs, AI weapons, becoming conscious and then hating humans, and 3D printing. What the heck is even that?
What's the what?
What are those impacts? Can you explain that?
What do you mean, what are those impacts?
The impacts that the Jane evidence talks about.
Do you want me to explain why they're bad?
No, can you explain how they happen?
Yeah, sure.
What plausible scenario do we create an AI that then kills us all?
Yeah, so the argument is that a lack of regulation of emerging tech that comes from like a lack of sort of norms created by the US-led Democratic Corps would cause sort of less checks and more opaque development of these technologies.
I thought the app clarifies to allow emerging tech to expand, i.e. the tech innovation stuff being good. Can you explain?
Yeah, so the distinction is that the app rejuvenates the US tech industry. The Jane evidence, the claim that it makes is that US leadership is good because it sets regulations on how these technologies are developed.
Okay, where do we get rare earth metals?
The ground.
The ground, where? There are certain parts of the earth that have more natural resources than others, especially with rare earth metals. You can't just find them by digging a hole. Where do we get them?
Sure. In the context of the AF, we're talking about domestic rare earth mining, mineral mining.
Which card talks about that?
I mean, the Thomas evidence, it's about the effect that I mean, I can give you examples of places in which we have rare earth mineral deposits.
The Allison 17 card says that escalation happens, quote, unless both parties take painful actions to avert it. Why are those actions painful?
I don't know exactly what you mean, but like
that's
we think that
evidence. What do you mean what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know exactly what the author was trying to indicate by that specific word. We think that the actions would be economically unfeasible, though, which is why they don't have.
Okay, cool. So you have no definition of what pain is or a theory of that.
Well, that's not what I said. I said that in the context of what this card says.
I asked you a question about the word that the author used. And you said, I don't know. So do you want to explain, or do you want
You
to
asked me what painful means in like a one-line quote in the card that was taken out of context.
What makes the law clear? It's not taken out of context. What makes the law clear, and how do we make the law clear? Clarity. That's the point of the plan.
We think that it's about the perception that businesses have and the
perception that businesses have.
Yeah. So the ability of businesses to determine whether they are liable under the CWI.
Okay. Why do we care about existential risk?
Why do we think that extinction is bad? Is that the question?
What?
We care about existential risk because we think that existential risks are undesirable.
Why is that bad? You just said.
Yeah. So do you want me to explain why we think that extinction is bad? Because people would die.
It's panoptic.
Wait, oh my! I thought it was only on. It's only a house. Wow.
Hello. Are y'all good?
I need a second to stop that. Yeah.
Are you good now?
Okay. Yeah.
Both good, judges? That's great.
Our introduction to language serves as the founding mode of the inauguration of the lost object, as our subjectivities become dependent on this initial sacrifice. Thus, enjoyment is not the result of the attainment of our object desirable, it only occurs in its absence, like Sisyphus, or punishment is not the repetition of the task itself, but is instead the incompletion of the cycle of human enjoyment account. In 13, the Descartes is all self-tapping leads us toward a constant social pattern belongs as the social sort of enjoyment, psychoanalytic thought, inherently resists appropriation by appropriating the common good, the attempt to create a perfect future which is possible, that's exacerbates human, self-making whatever view from beyond vision, good self, unattainable, unattainable fiction, good self-knowledge, to achieve is the problem, the good is unheard, no more with these speculations of the appropriation, society, we don't have social things for which the good is an existence, outside the barriers of record, realizing the good is subject to get warning to convenient, stable, belongs to me, to undermine the very idea of political watch, political theory, so I know remove society, the direction of good, even the ideal, is not realizable psychoanalysis, purpose, or recover repetition, which seems to be, or seems to be grasped, yet try subtraction, political organization, I raise one of the proposed originally traumatic constituent loss subject to speaking about sacrifice, part of result, this sacrifice produces an object, these into parts, loss of the subject, just have to do that, producing enjoyment through repetition, the initial loss subject, engaged self because the loss enacted reproduces all subject, and enables subject to enjoy this object once it attained. The object ceases to be the object, but also result of subject to repeat the cycle of action, producing object return blood, taking power in order to reduce also social enjoyment without all subject life, satisfaction, life, repetition, sacrifice, increase life, work, living, one, which control that subject. Object, better things are going more likely, death, repetition, subjectivity, progress, better rights, self, the back, and every rest of work, and enjoyment, rose, and the extra trauma, masking, project, the area, form, revenge, still overcoming the repetition, no need to leave behind. Hand a single one step when we look so openly, however hard it is to do so at the moment of the political situation, the plan, nuclear warfare, is a phenomenon. There's more like a surrealist and narrow, unbearable nightmare, psychosis than the same word McGowan. The 13 paragraph of subject, not just the images of the also subject to absent, they'll have sort of mind over responsibility. But it's a subject of subject, the lost period, abuse of lost with subject placing the additional function of subject having the object possibility, imagine that the other process, usually of the ultimate joint, that is with the other charge spirit, subject position, cosmetic, and rotation, will pass the object, also the subject, as we have parent, surrounds with the use the same social authority to find authority, cause the shots that because see the social structure, and sorry, like function, the maybe starting to see the social abilities, like trying to accept the desire the subject to variety of the man, trying to wrestle the problem, the applicant, the parent, the surprising, the gap is the gap that being the same total case, with my political expression of the notions that should politics, and call for social arrangement, exempted by political formation, the confession is based on the same paranoia, the parent, subject not accepted as also previously the word that is also empirical rather than ontological, the means of your political class, the normal dimension, the piece of power, the running these subjects, reason their freedom, what's more election, work, and eliminating the real authority, not to discord, only reconfiguring politics with the trained enjoyment, increase analysis, necessary to view sacrifice as the inevitable end to the pursuit of the good. McGowan 19, what's going on, politics really power, trouble, before it seems the political enjoyment, the presence, for all political position, political achievement, the formal enjoyment, placing enjoyment, and the reporting of significant conservation, about enjoyment, first examples make sense, working out, see the individual side, political against self-suffrage, and open curse, rather than advance, but of self-interest, no political theory, a leader proceeds to go to the whole to bring away the illusion, the good exposing, politics and power struggle leaders simply form the power takes music could be distant trauma to our powers and present ourselves to enjoy politics isolate themselves others enjoy powers appeal because their job is learning powers on my second no one just internal for power leadership but at risk ropes we are sure to get taken in this policy facing with the vice active reservation some view those power not enjoy retaining power even those leaders who retain power finally speak capital political ship where one lose we trouble we lose and all of the political position because they could because we good as a joy it's to enjoy sacrifice sacrifice become cautious because all of the structure of function and great enjoyment the mindset and override committing self leading to the Romanian reaction pleasure is subject to control what we imagine subject to constitutional structure of psyche makes it impossible to become sadly emerging object the rest of enjoy requires the loss object loss increase access excitation leasing enjoyment and limiting shuffling is it's a limiting joy controlling occurs through self-destruction this all can be recognized by machine control efforts intrusion and policy ideologies for travel of interest to rationalize the official who would the initial rather than basically providing an alibi for conscious producer warlordship must have conspiracy losing or gain to show the fact that human integrity both more into the future structure the plane they do have a resource economic service so this economic enjoyment is concerned by climate change they lay the privilege of enjoyment is their position when tight still what repeatedly so fire and grenade to the creature they escaped from claim order born to the firewall and pushed out a case did not fulfill or existence. Even after knowing the punishment or creator, we continue to incur the wrath of gods by challenging the Vigi and I think the powers of for economy, dominance of the economy of capitalism is a form of watch nature, self-destruction is constantly being circumvented with the epistemology, monocycling, arguing, pleasure, so most of black holes place coupled with the political return political there is nothing to be prone to fear and temporal safety second on village capitalists actor fail by succeeding so far coverage forcing direction ever leading technically boost what goes tomorrow the capitalists the practices of operating up to the subject of the government of the hard capitalists and device country make that problem and now speaking to that surplus fires always temporal 3 sounds to provide the prosecutor repulsion potential trade by bad that should department remain or resist over rising this will be protected as that post has failed copies of promise and list deliver the model subject from these weeks of lacking alienation and frustration brought in by the one hand ranking terroristry the opposite promise fairness and our things having to deal with the subject freedom but with a subject that assisting post modified choice moment superior authority killing when the tribe historical march to the economy spirit reality. Potential practice technology percent with the situation how the genius found it. We have the bottom front way of the core so where it's the accident rating free capitalism building to the moment. Historical college capital accusing value the magistrates meaning when he works at a money place north of mill for escape our tradition must be leadership escape our research pricing with the nature of subject micro and keeping serious technology. Remember gravity speaking China play on the ship and global power dynamics towards Africa to pursue the good incentivize its escalation. Maybe 1970 from Africa the direction see so later for the state carry for the future is more and more that is for actually possible work for the efficiency techniques system can America Africa runs last for capacity for $9 billion dollars in 2005 for direct investment increase $62 billion in 2008 GDP government closures closed down 40% of the country. Countries of 1 billion people live in cities of population of Cuba. China is larger than India, so large areas of the 80s practice that would be back to implement approximately retributed the test for economic behavior as modern establishing towards under caps that is mostly disjointed most like system randomly collective and disconnected non-collective linked together to try multiple neural points of organisms or complex no food normally in a bunch of rich percent or 20% 80% 90% Korean plant mineral group of guys 4 permanent active there's in the future making Africa caps being so by Africa China covers the urban informers of China Africa slowly given by China producing imported and China's president Africa is the most given dish capital in many ways is that we check over initial reports concept of the global economic crisis and what's the most solution to global traffic organization capacity by considerable technical commissions of rapid rise in getting carbon capture machines one of these central machine economic control example there is special concept of of course this is what I believe that I by myself the dark force my known self will never be more than a little including the force that God's strange gods come forth from the force including my known self and I go back and I must have the courage to let them come going down in the 13th the belief putting knowledge practice providing progress belief progress exception human subject knowledge subject is our organization of the force knowledge and knowledge because this notion of person is able to be a question for bullshit. Subject subject rather than not subject wonder how yours the experience of the passive notice and doorway conscious towards the access to conscious result. The concept that you know thinking you get some second answers. Brackets conscious of the subject makes over the conscious second answers. And period subject to make progress and causes well recognition one makes sense. Marks even reduce the captain knowledge one makes sense. Unconscious desire to take responsibility for that is coordinates one does not progress more prolonged to already hasn't see different truth that you subject to second political project makes we seriously public progress when trying to progress. So recommend the separate simply necessary rather view education with the barriers the paradox of aim for progress makes me see second the politics is not education with the mid progress towards obstacle rather driving 47 based on the repetition to drive repetition to the radical situation one hour set fires to set up bringing the farm 60 repetition to these assets almost being sacrificed one begin few political from interest away subjects to reference over by giving the terrain the beyond the edge and it's kind of principle to walls and posted and also the edge me thought it should be subject based belief in the possibility solution life one seeks first to because the obvious was the one drawing around the bears the theory was not great political change by saying just rolling between enjoying loss between three only enjoy recognize the correct nature of loss rather than recognize political project being faithful to carbon a space of freedom enjoy rather than machine and vinegar they believe that they can address all resources within the current paradigms disavow part excellent lots pleasure and Fletcher Rambo 17 the decoupling control the scheme force the given force capital so same with the pair as possible without impossible decoupling innovation neoliberal the pleasure to economies with resource productivity self decoupling conservation factors is all shift by shifting the material environmental burden to developing countries the Japanese better communicates research repair being paid obsolete to greater resources the food ethnicity be likely be politically acceptable because policy regard these two narratives was too strictly since rather industrial revolution failed to neutralize overall growth that we close cycles and possibly cycles of matters also created by the HP source of renewable energy difficult to imagine I imagine for complicated monetary economies material consequences of becoming always too many increasing energy plus overall production but most of the markets and all the function is unclear multiple place current secondary sector is grounded and fossil fuel use digitalization is dependent on cheap labor.
Okay, cool. You good?
Yep.
Awesome. Is it ever good to do things that we enjoy?
Yeah, I mean, a point is that enjoyment is inevitable.
Enjoyment is inevitable. What's that mean?
It means that like the death drive functions as the operative paradigm for all subjectivity. Lack is constitutive in that when we are introduced into language, we introduce to ourselves a fundamental lack in our being because we can no longer relate to the object world directly. The argument is that the 1AC identifies this previous state of wholeness in different things like tech leadership or the Goldilocks zone between like the law and businesses or regulation and innovation, right? Our argument is that you attempt to find a lost object which can never actually be recovered because it is constitutive, not empirical. We cannot find it, we cannot locate it, precisely because in order to become a subject, we must inaugurate our own lack.
Yeah, so I have a couple questions with that. First, just like, is the argument that that is not a state, like, is it impossible for something like businesses to be able to have clarity in the context of like a law? Like, is that not possible?
We think that the standard, especially of clarity, I mean, in the context of businesses, we'll talk about it first. The VE evidence is very clear about the way in which capitalism operates under a perpetual dissatisfaction. It takes advantage of the movement of the drive in order to create continual. This is an important explanation of why you can't achieve clarity. In order to create continual dissatisfaction, which means the point at which the even point at which regulation and innovation can coexist is non-existent because capitalism requires perpetual dissatisfaction, which causes more expansion. It will always infringe upon the realm of regulation precisely because of the
like dissatisfaction.
I mean, it's not that it causes it, it's that it takes advantage of the movement of the drive towards consumption, right? We are always looking for the next object of our enjoyment, and as soon as we acquire it, we realize that we are still dissatisfied, and so we pursue another one. Capitalism attempts to fix this in the form of a commodity.
Okay, different question. The evidence about like Africa and China, why is this going to the Africa?
We think that the mimetic rivalry that the AF plays out with China and Africa would be played out within Africa. The MBA evidence is really great.
Yeah,
about how China
about U.S.-China competition at all.
It actually definitely is.
It's very specific to U.S.-China competition in Africa. It is also specific to U.S.-China economic competition and incentives in Africa. The argument they're making is that the African economy not only has a lot of resources that China and the U.S. are willing to exploit, but also is but also is a place ripe for neoliberalization, which is what our thesis about capitalism is, that it's constantly expansive. We think that the AF's mining project is just a way of expanding capitalism even further, especially in the context of like rare earth metals, which you can't just find by digging a hole.
I'll take this.
You should just
Okay, 40 seconds, please. 9:20 left. I'll send it. Then I'll write it down. Brendan's gonna send one card during the speech. It's at like the bottom of the flow, though. Okay. Should be sent. Case K. Okay. Has anyone not gotten it?
We still took
Okay. The Maui decision fosters uncertainty over what type of solution or cover NPDS from such shift for Peter Gilmer and say the plan creates small regulatory force was preferable to increase certainty, the less economic growth in area mining, self military tech, all extinction. It matters they drop haste because it proves all of our predictability arguments on framework because they can just not engage the case, but make nebulous statements about to nitpick arguments in the app, which means they never actually have to engage the app. The K with the app for permanent and competitive opportunity cost alternative reduce problems outlined A predictability and your interpose negative monopoly, the unpredictable focus shift that decrease education, proves intricacies, in-depth arguments, research when I see B fairness doesn't shape subjectivity, school media family debate doesn't shape subjectivity, school media family and the community way, other rounds the impacts, the consequences must be evaluated. Isaac 2, because one of it is not because one of our responsibility tells us that intentions are ensuring the achievement of review serving any world, be able to conscious supporters politics, much about intended consequences, the effects of action that is significant, equally important to ask about the pursuing effects of pragmatism, moral solutions, under best political effectiveness, choosing these things without evidence. Some turn to the app, shifts in the app increases clarity for businesses, which you should prefer because it's specific to our internal link psychoanalysis and repeatedly proven false. Even modern versions can't be falsified or rely on anecdotal clinical experience, not empirics. There 17. Psychoanalysis gained little empirical support, challenged by one version of evidence and solid and persuasive outcomes with self-imposed isolation. Empirical science is psychoanalysis pseudoscience because it cannot be reviewed all attempts to revise the fall into the trap based on theory, clinical experience, rather than scientific evidence, energy analysis, or expected research, or knowledge evidence-based remains then the analysis of treatments of evidence of efficacy results cannot be generalized to long-term therapy in which no trials but conducted therapies have been tested or mixtures of second dynamic and CBT that consider neuromeasuring validate or neuromeasuring validate and conscious based only of shared technical course as a superficial release but the complex psychoanalytical theory most ideas based on anecdotal little impact or medicine and experts difficulty reconciling perceptive methods of psychoanalysis scientific method based on empirical testing that one revision no fair coherent responsive critical field at least prepared to rejoin academia and clinical science and psychoanalysis is wrong terrible methodology every refutable claim is industry and effective results but a buggy 10 over the 30 psychoanalysis and displaced by scientific psychology persistent popular culture psychoanalysis a book of science and practitioners not correct scientific research psychoanalysis and this discovery have nothing before the first experiment they included control group 10 placebo effects including reasons and tested 110 years in psychoanalysis have now set up a single lab or marginality typical to science their hypothesis so they are hard to test and this possible and typically refuted psychoanalysis for a second and the doctrine scientific psychology discovery and psychoanalysis has zero logical or empirical basis can't be scaled up until the existing or the existence of human conditions due to scientific terms. Robinson 8. Organic-based relevance of politics argumentation back into these claims assertion linking Lacanian theory democracy to continue when romantic critiques existing regime that are reproducing their alternatives or Lacanian perspectives fail to understand partiality that's not true relative to any other relative to the others very intolerant and often open other voices because there are reasons to take the judge or to judge the others feeling exerts the urge to derive the other of the community suffers from ontological and epistemological restrictiveness limits to explanatory power and required societies necessary and avoidable involved to the listen to the biologically nor empirically demonstrated. McGowan whole card 1 permit the African reconfigure politics through the terrain of enjoyment arguing all includes the African overcome the scope by the keys and sex with concrete reforms key their offers to reach at 13 frequent critical psychoanalysis is an inability to propose reforms fall back to the notion everyone should just undergo psychoanalysis don't believe everyone undergoing psychoanalysis would change much politically as political struggle can integrate insights without actual help from help from actual psychoanalysis everyone's already through a second psychoanalysis can be spelled up to like society and politics sharp 10 the conspiracy involved radical transformation of people subject to structure analysis deductions with the world political relevance and clinics are something to use subject to future personal media identical transformation socio-political system probably will equate any political change to all treats on subject or subject to the political theories success subject will simply give up their inherited ways and will work creating Roman 3 or abstract movements on produce political results and science balance is content 15 transnational alternative reality of real work that indicates protection totality and states of outside symbolic movement rejecting non-measured position resolution alternative people even biological predisposition work to find better alternatives less enticing historical labors and intellectually difficult one to provide a viable vision the Fox uses better offering they see the fake evidence but one the ask concrete regulatory form is for sustainable and parallel data for sex solves environmental concerns and transition fails really 16 GDP responsible energy increase of foreign use of 5 minutes less than resources the rising incomes correlated with food healthier lives opportunities of global fertility rates decelerating populational peak and like the physical levels will the extent of productivity improve more efficient for the sensitive species like 50% humanity decoupling everything is information humanity the peak farmland water use peak and climate in 1970 the US achieved absolute decoupling from plastic paper aluminum steel and relative for 3 commodities additive manufacturing reduced cost by 90% of the for energy would double use how world needs to be supplied by 6,000 plates the fast reactors 5,000 years and kept sustainable right 20 despite sending compelling mega shirts are completely wrong the peak oil population bomb middle run and then happen tagging capitalism super shortages price of the allocates resources those values and what better ways to grow more and better use the economy grow but consumption is decrease we're getting more from less 3 or second the alt turns warming that's Mueller 20 capitalism drives economic prosperity freedom perspective also capacity for growth and innovation or critics respecting awesome capacity for growth and innovation successful movements that stop domesticated markets and no social status and uninterested in sustaining private sector and cannot come into work side the book of albums only an individual not for the private sector war against competition will be found in one by entrepreneurs applying mutual powers for humanity's collective potentialist neo-socialist turn up the issue to engines of innovation 3 the card is a ton of posturing by white habits bad without warrants or evidence they they actually read the cards about what resources be deployed, and they have to read impacts to those cards. Otherwise, no impact of resource depletion. The MBA evidence. One, this cards about extractive capitalism, which Bailey terms we're able to innovate and use more when we're able to generate the materials domestically using things like 3D printing, which solve resource extraction in war. Second, the card says Chinese intervention in Africa through things like the OBOR. Is bad? Not a link to the app. I still think the rule leverage is to say hedge bad though, so I'm going to preempt that here. Third, starting China, if US foresees this losing hedge will lash out and maintain it causes war. Fourth, is Japanese solves extinction and impact filter. It's 2017. Your resources have less government China wants security rule system trying to produce spheres of influence while there's any conflict or dominate for Soviet space China. What companies say India, South Asia, Middle East, Yahoo, and Saudi, and around the global spheres of influence, sharing great power, competition, regional, Japanese, world, global constitution, China, be more likely to challenge the US and American power retreats to encourage regional power to solve their own problems. The United States, thank you, okay, as a first, will try to spy, pursuit of hedges, and will plan to military posture to China, Peru, 6, no other country has a capacity of both to lead. House 17, there's no alternative how we're able to step in China's focus on consolidating domestic order and interests and institutions designed to bolster geopolitical influence, structure, focus on retaining the power and peace, preoccupied with his help for population, Europe, second by relationship that in practice countries lack the capabilities and consensus of what needs to be in the Gauss, or the McGowan Dark Forest Poem stuff. One, the card super circular, it says that if we want to know things that we are, but it says we want to know things, but then the things that we know are just lies to placate us. If that's true, there's no way we should know what we don't know, and we should not actually know anything, which means our evidence would fall, or that links to their evidence too. Second, our evidence is defense of rigor and vetting ideas. Science is in search for capital key truth, but if it is, only our interest solves humility. Hilton 14, science is a possible which we derive reliable, predictable rules of experimentation. What is everyone else talking about? Most people capital science is a person with capital key truth, engagement, people learning law, posting, math, or nobody understands what people say. Science, what they mean is truth. This views backward science means here's an ideal society. A lot of science is not interested in truth. This history is what we can prove over and over again. She's living so third, their of expertise is over essentializing Block 18. Science is not monolithic in having the present monument or perhaps moments that hardly implies a wholesale rejected methods of methods have given a systematic reputational versus lots supported by terms of publicly available evidence. We should never invest in science without question authority. Evaluation must be made on a case by case basis. The Fletcher and Remote evidence we saw the warrants in Fletcher says decoupling can happen because it wasn't be feasible, but the apps or regs or regulations solve those warrants at the Bailey evidence using the card. Slack or email. Hold on. Email. And I'm gonna read the card front and side. If my computer will.
Here, do you want me to just?
Yeah. Here. Dematerialization solves Jevons, McAfee 19. Jevons was wrong, or ones that keep wrong without end, but used is not the last exchange over when fractors make gas cheaper to make for coal 1 time, even though price decrease competition and spurs dematerialization farms keep getting bigger, harvest will get using less land, use less metal, more renewable energy, use up no resources. No, death drive links, it reinforces things that are already said. Cunning and death drive is ultimately suited in scientific assertion, primordial mass, which is no skill or problems in the idea that things lead to philosophy, which suffering you seem to be inevitable. No one explains masochism by death, thinks everyone confers election will to suffer Lacanian metaphysics. Mark card at Lacanian metaphysics. Okay, so I just marked the second to last card at Lacanian metaphysics. Yeah, that's it though.
Framework, why does the decrease in education matter if debate doesn't shape subjectivity?
We more think if you win, that debate is able to shape subjectivities. We think your model would be worse for those. Yeah, we ultimately think debate isn't able to shape our subjectivities. It's more just like an even if you win that argument.
Does education not shape subjectivity?
Education, we think the specific like education of this one round isn't. No. We think it's more about creating a fair model debate.
The button card says, quote, testable ones have been soundly refuted. Why doesn't this contradict the card before that says that psycho is untestable and unfalsifiable?
Yeah, sure. So it says, in instances where people try to prove it using science, the tests were ineffective. The Paris evidence
So, okay, let's go back. Let's just start over. What is falsifiability then?
Okay, in the context of the Paris evidence and the second piece of evidence we read on like the psycho true false debate, it's being able to prove something with scientific experimentation that uses good mechanisms like control groups, double testing, double blind.
Is only tied to scientific control. Right?
We think in the context of trying to use a psychoanalytic theory to describe politics, it's good.
Should falsifiability apply to how we make all truth claims?
In the context of psychoanalysis, we think falsifiability is important.
Yeah, why? Like, can you falsify the claim that debate doesn't shape subjectivity? That seems to be a claim about the psyche, no?
We can use evidence. There have been tons of rounds that have ultimately not shaped our
So I
insights.
think studies were conducted to do that.
One, we
To
think you won't have
isolate meaning?
studies. Two, the opposite.
Okay.
It's more a question of when we're weighing.
What's the theory of human desire if ours is false?
What's our theory of human desire?
Yeah.
We think there's not one overlying theory.
Okay, perfect.
The other thing is, I want to be clear because I know you're going to bring this up later in the debate. We think when comparing evidence, you should prefer evidence that uses experimentation. Obviously, no one is writing papers about if debate is able to save our subjectivities in the context of like policy
Why would you
debate.
make the claim?
Why did we make the claim?
Yeah.
Because we know you're going to make a claim to the opposite.
Wait, okay. No,
That's
okay, the 3D printing stuff, how does 3D printing solve resource extraction in the war?
Yeah, Bailey says that we're able to 3D print certain materials that we currently have to get from other places, which then solves for those
I
materials.
understand that you have to like have the resources to then 3D print with. Like it doesn't.
Yeah, but the
create things out
resources
of
we
thin air.
3D print with aren't the resources we're currently extracting. Like we would use resources domestically.
You can't make metal from plastic.
Well,
You still need to get the resources from somewhere.
that's not true. The claim made by the 3D printing card is that plastic has been decoupled and that we can use plastic to replace these technologies.
Which card is that?
Bailey.
No, good. Oh, shoot, that's the wrong. That was the wrong restart. Yeah.
I just had a second. Let me make sure it's saved.
Do you want to just slack me that?
Yeah.
Also, for this reread.
Yeah. You're right.
45 seconds. Overview and pay. Restart on framework and go down. I'll be clear where I am. But all the like say go wrong, unfalsifiable, all those cards will be in the lineup. Oh no.
Are there any cards in the? You might have said that. I just missed it.
No.
Is the sustainability stuff also in the one where?
I don't.
Yeah, it is.
Not sure what that's part of the debate, but okay. Darwin, not good. Karen.
Wait, you want to skip the camera?
I was gonna say, yeah, I don't.
Sure, the camera's just been on us.
Hello.
Maybe just put the mic on the middle.
Yeah, the mic on the middle table seems like that. There's really no one watching.
Probably.
The central question of this debate is what and how we enjoy. Before its introduction to language, human thoughts were the important mess. We couldn't communicate, separate, or organize ideas. Our instincts exist in an autoerotic need, a completely undifferentiated existence of instant satisfaction where we have no relation at all to the object world. Our introduction to language is thus a subject forming event, and that through signification we learn to form indirect relations with the objects mediated through representation. We divided the concept of self, other, world, and objects via language. Subjects falsely, retrospectively hypothesized that this pre-linguistic state was one of tonal satisfaction, direct relationships between ourselves and the object world. This falsely constructed direct relation is the lost object, a constitutive sacrifice of nothing at all. The fault of the subject is that to enter this indirect world of language, we made a sacrifice of what was never there. We then convince ourselves we can recover in a new form because it does not exist. We cannot enjoy the object in its presence, so we have to enjoy the object in its absence, which endows us with a compulsion to repeat our acts of sacrifice in order to enjoy the absent presence of the lost object. This is the death drive. The framework arguments are not dropping the app or engaging the court. These the app reading quotes from the one I see, which probably proves that we are negating it to some extent. The second question is that if human beings are indeed rational animals, how is it that these total ethical, social, ecological, political, catastrophes is an impact turned to their kind of framework. It's not cognition, but desire that is the essence of man. With the Darwinian revolution, we have learned that we were not alone in nature. With the Freudian revolution, we have learned that we are not even the masters in our own minds. Our actions are controlled fundamentally by the unconscious set of wild and unacceptable desires that form the bedrock subjectivity. Our interp is that they can weigh their conscious intentions, but our practical and ethical point is that they must also be responsible for their desires, which reside within the unconscious. The doesn't shape subjectivity arguments. One is it's unfalsifiable, unsensible. Two is balanced, shaped, proved by Genling and Louisville Project, which means that we have more empirics to this question than they do. Third is that it shapes subjects in the margins. We spend thousands of hours of our lives doing this at the expense of other things. Third is that it doesn't assume psychoanalysis or the art theory of the psyche, which means just right, project the argument on facing evaluating consequences stuff while impact turn with the psychic dogma. Just have the one see against offense or core psychic premises, but if we aren't allowed to negate the psychic train of the app and produce a psychic dogmatism, this is especially true in the age of denialism. Their assumption behind all knowledge is that if you build it, they will come. Producing knowledge has the adverse effect. Anti-vaxxers being told that if we are trying to help, them, but it only steeps them in further denial. Politics is a question of desire and death drive, not of knowledge or knowing anything, which means evaluating consequences doesn't do anything because their only assumption behind debate is they can produce some kind of valuable knowledge that then allows us to engage the world more effectively. They say that shift says increase in clarity. No, they don't. The chaos and uncertainty are inevitable. The subject premise fundamentally of a refusal to know the unconscious. We have thus have a passion for authority. The missing binary signifier is a point where senselessness is included in a system of sense. Whenever social authority attempts to defend the reason why they made decisions, there's always a point at which rational logic breaks down or stops working. This ontology is what they did at the end of when you see cross-sects. When I asked about their impacts, the binary signifier is a point at which you are forced to resort to tautology. It's the point where you're unable to create a final answer, and social authority cannot run smoothly. This is marked in childhood by the master signifier because I'm your parent. Their approach to the missing binary signifier is to have it created for them in the enlightenment values of science and the law. That is their relationship to legal systems. The point of the endless clarification of the law is not only to enjoy the failure of repeated proposals for solutions, but also act as this refusal to know the unconscious by relying on the law as the arbiter of all things. Look at when you see cross-sects in their Viator card, their Zantz card, their grand idea as per when I see cross-sects, as per the one I see is to find a Goldilocks zone of perfect regulation where businesses and the government exist in perfect harmony because of their little test. That zone not only is empirically is always unstable within capitalism, as the Vigi evidence, but also never exists because capitalism requires eventual dissatisfaction. Whatever zone they think solves will be immediately violated by both businesses and governmental research leaders, precisely because they will remain dissatisfied post-plan, which is a turns case argument that relies on our thesis, which means if they lose the psychoanalysis falsifiability debate, they auto-lose plan solvency, infinite clarification via things like seven-factor tests, or simply the search for new master signifiers to replace the old, which proves that they abhor their kind of enjoyment. It mimics the human tradition of religion and attempting to fill the gap at the core of the subject with a final justification. This fundamentalist response to the gateway to fascism that makes us unable to criticize social authority. This fascism is actually incredibly enjoyable for the subject, which is why we've recreated it across history. If you think especially the history of European societies, the permutation arguments, links, or dissets, we are impact turning the idea of chasing an object of the political good, the lost object, which means that they don't get an argument about it being compatible with politics, especially because they're taking Todd's quote out of context. Or evidence about McGowan saying that the psychoanalytic session doesn't affect politics, but he says in the evidence very clearly that coming into contact with our enjoyment solves for the ability to reconcile ourselves with it, especially within politics. That cap sustainable debate. Our internal links are not about environmental collapse. Our argument is that economic abstraction has no core anchor to value, so it inevitably collapses. Econ collapse triggers their own internal links about competition with China, which means you don't have to win, and unsustainability claim if you win an econ collapse argument because it burns the app. The impact turning the growth mindset of when I see Sargon and when I see Kemp, capitalism is sick with internal contradictions. A driving mechanism of value production is now speeding into its own death and continue buying to capital to create increased proliferation of the very value producing mechanism of automation, private sector investment, resource extraction, value fetishism, or profit making remains their only existential horizon. They understand enjoyment located on unlimited growth or perpetual deferral of the lost object to the future. It promises no less than a paradise on earth, only if we buy into it a little more. Its own restless proliferation of value collapses it from the inside with things like infinite speed of engagement. This is especially true in the context of their argument because it's about dematerializing abstraction, which makes it more abstract and disengaged with material value, which means they have no anchor for value, which is what causes things like economic collapses, like things like in the Reddit bubble from the last year. Capitals require subjects are continuously dissatisfied in order so they might continue to pursue enjoyment in the form of the commodity. That's the stuff that I explained above, but this causes things like resource wars. The way that the app explicitly sets up mining competition from the US and China turns the app because of resources that they try to acquire for leadership cause the wars that they intend to prevent through a mutual kind of neo-imperial escalation. Their argument is about REM mining, which means they can't get out of resource extraction in the context of REM mining, which the one I will read evidence on, which proves that they can't argue about dematerialization in the context of other resources, because every argument we've made is specific to the 1AC. The next argument they made is the head stuff, and it doesn't matter because we've already impact turned it, but they've shown their true colors. We'll impact turned with paranoia.
paranoia, but you should remember how many vague threats the evidence that they read in the 2EC talks about. They will identify infinite kind of threats precisely because the subject is always dissatisfied. This is the paranoia argument. Paranoia is a function of their ideology. The shark in Jaws is not just a shark at all. Fidel Castro once said that it is obvious that the Jaws is a leftist film and that shark is a brutal capitalist, but conservatives think that the shark is the communist, the terrorist. But the truth is that the shark represents a paranoid centrality. The same way the Nazis condensed a multitude of fear into a paranoid scapegoat. Instead of thinking that we sacrifice our object of wholeness, they think that someone else could have taken in the enjoyment of other subjects is threatening, so they reassure themselves that they have the ultimate enjoyment by fabricating imagined threats of the other that rob them of their own enjoyment. If you impact one as fast as the paranoia seeks to restore a kind of patriarchal authority, we seek to retake what's rightfully ours by force. We have this image of the obscene excess of the other's enjoyment. We seek to punish the other for its excess. This serves to justify restrictions on civil liberties, racism, police violence, etc. Allison 17 proves our thesis. 1AC Allison 17 proves our thesis about warfare. It says escalation happens, quote, unless both parties take difficult and painful action to avert it. Why are these things painful? Because they cause us to go against the path of enjoyment. This is why paranoia is so prevalent in the status quo. And SCS escalation is also a negative example from their evidence. Why would China escalate over perfectly useless plots of sand in the middle of the ocean, absent a unconscious desire to sort of create these escalations? The impact is lash out. The paranoia cannot admit that the hidden enemy has already been vanquished and thus constantly produces new enemies. Their chain evidence about autonomous weapons gaining consciousness, genetic superbugs, and 3D printed weapons. What even is this dystopic fantasy? If they were to admit that there are no longer any real threats to our wholeness, they would be forced to confront the unconscious, so that is part of our being, not caused by external source. They have to think enjoyment has been stolen, because if it hasn't been stolen, it means they are void by nature. The scapegoat for this kind of frustration becomes metonymically displaced throughout history from one form to another, which as a process can only be solved by recognizing lack is constitutive. That's a root cause claim, because the same way that the investment in Cold War struggle derived from a foundational insecurity from paranoia, the suspicion of the other is a structurally right-wing reactive political agenda which nourishes considered insularity that operates on the same logic of war on terror. The Chinese other and tech competition appears in the app as a barrier to the subject's enjoyment, which necessitates cycles of never-ending lash out. Violence becomes a cheap way of coping with their death drive, which turns the app, obviously, as they lash out and stuff.
Okay, are you good?
Yeah.
Okay, so your framework was like to weigh the conscious desires of the app along those lines?
You can weigh the conscious intentions of the app, but our point is that the unconscious desires are just as meaningful, if not more meaningful, than the 1ACs.
How do we determine the conscious intentions of the app? Like, what is that?
I mean, that's like what you stated, right? So like the subject consciously states that they want one thing. However, when we interact with the world through the unconscious, we tend to get in the way of that.
Sorry, I just want to make sure I understand. The stated desires of the app, is that like we can weigh the advantages? We can weigh like what?
It's like you get the world of the plan, but we get our links to what we think that the app has articulated as its desires.
Okay, and how do we determine if those desires are true or not?
What do you mean? Like that's what the process of debating is doing. Like we're saying like the 1AC is doing these things, and your job is to say no, it's not, or your job is to say that those things are good.
How do we weigh if you want to link to the K versus the app? What's the mechanism?
I mean, all of our links are like all of our impact scenarios. Our links are just articulating our theory in the context of the world of the plan. So like I don't even understand why framework is a question.
I get it. If you win turns, all right, that makes sense to me. The anti-vaxxer DA framework, how do you solve it?
I mean, it's not a question of solvency. Our argument is that politics is not a question of knowledge, but of desire, right? It doesn't matter how much knowledge we present most political subjects with, they won't change their opinions because politics has never been a question of knowledge.
Okay.
Our argument is that the psyche over-determines what.
I'm a little confused because this seems at tension with the debate-shaped subjectivities argument.
Why?
Is it true that we're able to like change the way we feel about things through the process of debate, or is
The
it
last
true that
argument-
anti-vaxxers are never going to change?
The last argument I made on debate-shaped subjectivity was that it doesn't assume psychoanalysis or the psyche. This is my point, that in debate, we also engage with unconscious motivations that only the 1NC is able to criticize in the way that we do. That's the stuff that Drew will talk about in the alternative on the webinar.
Okay.
That means that because it doesn't assume psychoanalysis or psyche, only we are able to like sort of access the claim that debate can shape subjectivity, even if your warrants are true. Because it's about unconscious engagement, not conscious.
I'm really confused. Just like, is the iterative process of debate, are you saying able to shape the way we think about things? And if so, why doesn't this work on anti-vaxxers?
I mean, yes, but not through knowledge gathering. That's our point. It's
Oh,
through like the 1AC carries with it unconscious engagements, just as the 1NC does. Our point is to say that the 1AC's unconscious engagements are bad. That process shapes the way we interact with our unconscious. That is why debate can shape subjectivity if we assume psychoanalysis is true,
Wait,
but
so
it
you
cannot if we
recommend
assume
that
your
we
words.
change our unconscious thoughts about the F?
No. Our argument is that the alternative aligns us better with the unconscious. Therefore, debate can shape subjectivity
that
insofar
mean?
as we're able to recognize our interaction with the unconscious.
Okay.
I'm sending out some cards. I'm going to be starting on like the 2AC pairs over falsifiability. And I'll go straight down the 2AC from there. And I'll be clear which cards of the 2AC I want. So if it helps, I'm doing like the 2AC answer. I'm doing the 2AC answer to the first McGowan 13 card, and then the 2AC answer to the alt, and then the 2AC answer to the Africa stuff.
Okay, right, can I get
Is everyone good? I have the cards.
The pairs of evidence versus double standard. The one he sees in the lab experiment relies on unproven social science too. Fairness and hegemony pretends that the experimental objectivity, but it does in fact exactly what we do. Scales of hypothesized as models and social observations to political theory. Second is the scientifically falsified models a good explanation for conscious thought, but not unconscious thought. It doesn't explain masochism or tell us how to react to pain. Science screams global warming is happening, but we don't do anything about it anyway. Science is profoundly bad at creating ethical relationships and does focus on drivers necessary to predict the subject in political sense. 3. Psychoanalysis borrows from elusive academic disciplines from philosophy, anthropology to linguistics, math, neither hard nor soft sciences suffice. But evidence is a dumpster with falsifiability because it proves there are tests that can be taken to disprove the theory, which means it's not totalizing. First, there's also no strict universal method and scientific method. Attempting to assert what makes it impossible for science to criticize self-applying the yardstick for experimental physics and psychoanalysis would be ridiculous because sciences all have different methods, one each untestable in terms of one another. Second is the subject is not reducible to neurology. 8 points language produces the subject and is exterior to the human body. The system of language exists before your word subject emerges from the alienation of body through language. So we can't analyze this from a neuroscientific perspective. Each point is many of the objects are desired perfectly useless from a biological perspective. Desires produce social illusion punishment for 2AC cross-6. Many of their claims are relying on falsifiable claims or testable studies and just prove the tautology and arbitrary deployment of the standard of why science should not be applied to every situation. The Robbins definition psychoanalysis is great explanatory theory for explaining politics, where impact the misunderstanding of political power. Extend the 1C McGowan 19 evidence, couple key arguments, all independent cases. First is psychoanalysis sees enjoyment as the basis for all political organizations. The one he sees invocation of a technological utopia is good to be achieved following the plan. Functions as deferral of unconscious tendencies as sacrifice in order to produce enjoyment, because the enjoyment only exists in absence, not the actual attainment of our goals. Enjoyment always subverts the conscious mode of power. The misunderstanding of this fundamental thesis culminates in response to one scapegoating we fail to understand our failure. Second is no one wants to maintain U.S. tech dominance. One doesn't enjoy having power, rather giving it up. Leaders constantly work towards their own downfall, proven by Robespierre during the French Revolution, Lincoln's policy of appeasement with the White South, and Napoleon's invasion of Russia. We like to think that people are motivated by power because it allows us to avoid confronting the nature of our enjoyment, where it's actually defined through self-sacrifice. If we win this falsifiable debate, it's all magnetic valid, because death drive means they will do the opposite of they actually consciously state to desire. Falsifiability is by right manner. And so I want to psychoanalysis and science, the rest of your psychology falls within the objective of maybe mostly discuss returns to psychoanalysis, not feeling deep, also science, you should are relevant. If also can do also should national life use over the type of pseudo-scientific connection of as a science in terms of mechanics and accepted the process of the test places the falsification about theory about social investigation on teaching pseudo-science the basis of scientific method issue normal the basis of most right science and found rules of state making so the method pure superstition tests and attainable whole class of attendees that will fair purpose like reverse complete motivation on me one kind of like having great power over based strong giving motivation for some of these things that word zero there for being able to express relation with relation to the concept technology. Let's look at example of others. Here's some peer-reviewed studies. It doesn't mean if it doesn't make the threshold into arbitrary distance. Anti-technology therapy reduces the equity effects of CPH1 and which has 3.85 kids of life years based on gene fact and also 1.83 claims under defensible scientific evidence. The ultimate alternative is organized masochism with a paradigm human subjectivity desires like wherever the river always at endless satisfaction, but we should only intervene that flow if we think there are other shorter ways to intense satisfaction. The river always flow forward to the act attempts to erect barriers in this flow of the river, which only functions as contortion and enjoyment. We both isolate the cause of suffering or obstacle to good side, but instead of changing the object, i.e. things like rare mind, we change the subject ourselves. They say psychoanalysis can't be seen alone. The McGowan 1800 answers is empirical analysis shows that psychoanalytic desires drive international relations, which means actors
thinkers aren't rational and acting in their own self-interest, but only explained by theses and enjoyment, such as China's building of islands in the South China Sea for no explicit purpose of the 2C example. They say abstract movements be a movement, but a new frame of analysis. This solves the act of one, our inability to innovate tech happened as a result of the way that capitalism works is revealed. It believes that enjoyment is produced through consumption and attainment of our objects rather than loss, which requires a double down on consumptive practices in order to somehow attain that enjoyment that will never come. Old solve this by rewiring desire to alter the practice of consumption itself by recognizing the death drive as a paradigm of subjectivity. Second is rather than constantly rushing to implement our goal visions that's based on a paradigm fear of the other taking our enjoyment, such as in new wars and Chinese technology, all reorient the subject to become content with the insecurity inherent within themselves, preventing the internal of escalation. The African debate, we are winning at these self-claim that water policy is driven by this enjoyment of past short circuits, the ability to access offensive means we control how their scenario goes out. Claims of resource scarcity are beholden to a global ecological conflict. Except MBA, if Africa now represents the new frontier for experimenting with water solutions, that were rare earth mining creates wars over African continent, perceived as the locus of indeterminability. Few interlinks versus China competition is Percy 1AC Super when it says compete on cosmic magnet making process marketing that is heavily dominated by China. MBA explains that the absent Zagyu or China plays out in Africa as a battleground for colonial powers. Says that Chinese capitalism is an externalized prominent actor in African region. They affluently escalates based on mimetic gravity. Second is rare earth mining as per 1AC Super. MBA says that much of this mining is done broad order to satisfy resource demand because Africa is viewed as abundant riches. There's a double wide island. They don't mine enough of resources domestically to actually gain that technical superiority dominance over China, or is paid in Africa. The African licenses this ship, which proves that even if they win the creates an ecologically sustainable solution. The solution only made by countless drivers. So we brought 3D printing doesn't solve because first they still need materials to generate those machines. Second, it doesn't solve resource shortages because they need to re-own those machines. Just leads to China attacking our resource from another, which generates an external impact of extinction because the driving countries to colonize Africa as a nationalist competitive drive to out resources around them.
Okay. How much are we?
9:20.
9:20. Start that.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm prep 352. Okay. Can I have this one?
Yeah, sure. Do you have cards to send? Because I have one.
No, I didn't have it.
I'll send it the one card then. It's just re-highlighting.
Did you say you were sending cards?
Yeah, sorry. I'm like tapping over to the dock. Okay, cool. It's done.
Okay. The order. Okay. Wait, one second. Yeah. Oh, is that all? I'm gonna download the doc. That's interesting.
I haven't gotten it yet, but can I go to the bathroom real quick?
Oh, sure.
Not about this round. The Reggie for us this round.
When you do your you guys. That's what they're literally putting it to it already.
Do you have anything to say? Yeah, we do, right? We have things to say.
Oh my god, we had some stuff, but it was so long ago. That would not be at this.
Maybe he'll go back to.
I'm gonna get like mad at him if he does that.
Should we start going else?
That would be so annoying.
Maybe he'll go back to our round. Sure.
Most definitely. Just hang in there, bro.
Yeah, hang there till tonight.
At least you guys just need this is all captured for history.
We can definitely commit school budget.
It's like everybody else.
Oh, dude. should be the first half against Sheffield. But if you give us some shit once,
I don't know what I do.
I give him my count.
I'm just not gonna give Zach the speaker. Very clear on that. So y'all play the ball there. Very clear. What?
We're good on it.
Okay, cool. The order is just the captain. Everyone good? Ambiguity in the functional equipment size causes massive regulatory uncertainty that crushes the industry and the economy independently. REM mining collapse, text track leadership, green lights, suppressive use of technology by China, which all culminates in extinction. On the entire overview is answered by the second wrong debate, which I'll do later on the flow framework. Use consequences the way the effort prefers competitive opportunity cost alternative that solves their links. Preferred. It's getting fairness and pressure. Interpret incentivized today. Infinitely regressive rate margins for teams to artificially generate competition, read floating pace, every single word to the 1AC and fade away. Any structure remotely related to the like racism or capitalism. They don't have an explanation for what desires are, or what the sort of bright line is for when a desire can be brought into the debate or be critiqued, which means at the same time their interest infinitely regressive makes being often possible in text fairness versus both an impact filter and an intrinsic good. There's they can't solve any of their offense because there are a million causes like family, friends, school, and they're everything in school, which all give us preconceived notions of the world that we come into with into debate with. But otherwise, the link is backwards because the competitive nature of debate breeds antagonism, non-agreement. We'll just rewrite their lives, even if they're right. Reading points from the one you see isn't engaging with the alpha or questioning whether the alpha is a good idea. Desire is nebulous and can't solve any of our offense. It doesn't solve planet stasis, which is key to predictability. Humans, the stuff about humans not being rational, humans doing bad things, the bad things sometimes doesn't make them irrational. Or defined by the death drive. All their evidence talks about the death drive in context of like the very micro level things. Not like we all want China war to escalate because it would kill us all. That's not. That's something that we desire, and there's no way that y'all can solve it. Because if I desire for China war to happen, that wouldn't somehow prevent it from happening. The entire theory makes no sense. The stuff about the subjectivity not being falsifiable. There are no studies on subjectivity within debate, which was 280 crossers, which explains why that's a distinct question. We can use sort of arguments about whether subjectivity exists in the context of debate to prove that the stuff about changing on the margins, it's wrong because the rewriting block stuff answers it, but it means that they link to all of their own offense. There's no psychic dogmatism DA because it begs the question of whether they're winning their theory. Knowing does matter because it informs action if they're right, because not all actions unconsciously motivated. Knowing that it is relevant in the context of a conscious action, even if they're right about unconscious action. If knowing doesn't matter, that y'all can't solve because only skills would matter in debate, which is begged by the question of subjectivity. But our framework actually accesses those forms of advocacy, which they said were good when they said that criticizing social authority is good. We actually said criticism better through our framework. Stuff about rational logic being a tautology. Either the death drive is also a tautology, which I did above, or there's some level of which rational logic is not. There's no clarification link because our affirmative, they haven't refuted the substance of our affirmative, which proves that it is possible to find this Goldilocks scenario. And there are examples of regulatory schemes that do resolve that. Growth isn't endless enjoyment because it materially makes conditions better for life and decreases inequality, etc. The growth is sustainable as the economy grows, innovation increases, material consumption decreases in price, factors that allocate resources best to their most efficient use. No statement trends prove that decoupling is possible. That's Bailey, Mueller, and Wright. The MBA link is wrong. The card is about China, not the U.S. Dad proves that they're now worse and more extractive and oppressive, but sustainability disproves the link because it proves that expansion capitalism is desirable. The stuff about REM mining being offloaded is wrong because it misunderstands the efforts about REM mining in the context of domestically. We do they consider the McAfee evidence, which matters because it says that there's no Javon's paradox. It doesn't assume changes in the elasticity of demand. Even though coal got way cheaper, people didn't use more of it, which empirically disproves all their offense. On the paranoia stuff, it's wrong because they need to win the threat is fabricated, but they didn't win case. So all the usual direct parts of the old that are utopian mindset that are just like we stop people from wanting to escalate conflict. Obviously, that links to all of our framework offense on the falsifiability stuff. They say Paris is about social sciences. Paris is about the way psychoanalysis is isolating itself from being actual good studies because only people who carry out the studies are people who already believe in psychoanalysis. Button Bunch says that they didn't have control groups and ignored things like placebo effects, which links to all their offense about psychoanalysis being true because it proves that those studies wouldn't work. If they are right, theories need to be provable. That's evidence. If they're going to explain societal structures, they need to be more than just anecdotes, but actual experiments proving them right. They did say that we've done tests proving psychoanalysis Paris states and said that they failed. I'll answer Sloan's letter in the flow language doesn't alienate science. That's how we're still able to do things, prove things without involving truths. The thing that's involving truths, they can just assert this with no evidence to back it up. The right layer evidence is bad as asserts in most sciences can. It can't be falsified. The majority of physics would be falsified. Could not be falsified at first, sure, but they eventually were able to prove the validity of things like Newtonian physics and CPT through research, which means that they eventually were falsifiable. The Solon's evidence of credibility of their studies is flawed. That's Paris 17, which postdates and all their evidence, all their studies are terrible. Insert that re-highlighting of Solon's, but the card isn't about psychoanalysis. It's about psychoanalysis as a therapy technique, not about design.
This school is Amber semester. I want to go for the 2 AR.
The what?
What was the name of the hot chicken place that was really good?
I thought it was Hattie B's that we wanted to go to.
Well, no, I think this is good.
Yeah. We go there every time we come.
It's
Awesome. What, are we gonna go with Arnie and Joe?
We should go for lunch.
We should go. We should do that instead of round 7.
Yo, we should stake round 7 on who can eat the spiciest chicken.
Dude, freaking Joe's gonna win that.
Dude, no, dude, we got this, bro.
I mean, I got this. You're not gonna help whatsoever.
I got this, bro. I got the barbecue chicken, bro.
That's not spicy, bro.
It's the mild barbecue though. Pretty spicy.
Man.
My goodness.
My spice tolerance.
Wait, what's
is
it called again?
0.
I forgot.
Hattie B's.
Yeah.
Patty. What's else?
We gotta convince Kuzo to go. And Tony said
Dude, we don't need to convince Kuzo to go. Kuzo wants to go.
And Tony said he needs to send his dad a picture of chicken.
That's weird.
It's a little strange.
That's weird. And Antonio's got
Did y'all go with Tamon?
What?
Did y'all go with Tamon?
We did go with Taman. I remember that. We went with Taman and then like Giorgio and Nick and George and PR were there. And Taman freaked out.
Y'all wouldn't stop talking.
Tom was like, oh my god, Giorgio and Biggie. I was like, bro.
Only Tamon.
Good.
Yeah. Cool.
They dropped the alt souls of case, which means case outweighs is not a viable 2AR, especially with a lack of perm in the 1AR. Even if there is links or distance, they spend like 5 seconds in the 1AR, the alternative, so don't allow new extrapolation in 2AR. All the alternative rewires desire to alternate subset by recognizing the depth drive is fundamental, enabling loss to be grappled with without they constantly seeking to develop and innovate. This enabled us to become content with insecurity so that we aren't rushing to compete with China and go to war. This our argument is that the kinds of conflicts that they articulate are caused by mutual escalation through paranoia, which means if we win our thesis of desire and of paranoia on a link level, we win that the only way to resolve the app's own impacts is through the alternative. They've also conceded the 1 and C McGowan 19 evidence, which takes out their ability to access their own scenario. Leaders do not want to maintain technology dominance because enjoyment is produced by pushing power to its limits through sacrifice. Examples of Robespierre, Religion's appeasement, and Napoleon's invasion of Russia prove they can never achieve the goal of outcompeting China because their pursuit of the good is a sabotage by the death drive. The belief they can achieve just creates scapegoating, lash out that culminates in more abstracted violence. It turns case by incentivizing more escalation. It proves a reason why politics is good. If politics good is not offense against the all, but it also proves that they don't get access to their own scenarios. The only hope of resolving any kind of offense is the alternative, the framework debate. Their evidence and warrants are sought to a false equivalence of knowledge and progress. That means the question of this debate is not what kinds of knowledge you gather, but whether the knowledge is a worthwhile endeavor in the first place. You must evaluate the 1AC on the level of desire. They say that we can make any structure of the app. It's not true. Or what we did, we impact toward econ, the law, and leadership. The app and 2AC all had offense on all of those things, which proves that we are answering the core thesis of the app. The no right line argument is a true win. Plus, if we win our thesis about desire, it doesn't matter because we win the desire shape subjectivity. It is the only avenue through which your ballot can actually do anything absent the other offense, which also turns in our ways fairness. We get to our links because desire shape politics. All our block examples of links and our rereadings and explanation of bad scenarios like SES escalation prove this. Plus, the anti-vaxxers argument. Desire is the terrain by which politics occurs, which means the 1AC's conscious knowledge is outweighed by their unconscious articulations. This means, regardless of their other offense, their model of debate concretizes the subjectivity that unconsciously affirms paranoia, which outweighs the risk of unfairness because it results in violent lash outs, the result of our own kind of insecure subjectivity. So it proves that we should combat it using things like the alternative, the nuances. They say that people do bad things. That's not our argument. McGowan talks about the death drive macro politically, and it's not just people doing bad things. It's a cyclical pattern of repetition. They understand these things as isolated instances. We understand them as interconnected. On the level of desire, the subject can be self-decisively negative. It doesn't meet their own standard of falsifiability, but we are the only team with empirics like Louisville, Jedling. They may be right that the knowledge we gain through debate doesn't shape subjectivity via traditional routes like iterative testing, but the ideologies that we learn to endorse produce unconscious engagement that do shape subjectivity. That's our argument about how their model kind of produces paranoia. They say that knowing matters, and if knowing doesn't matter, the all doesn't solve. No, our argument is that knowing isn't sufficient, and that desire explains the world, which means it's not an impact turned to knowledge, but rather it's an argument about why desire must come first. They say it's possible. There are examples of the app. What examples? There's none in this debate. They use about capitalism perpetually being unstable. Only we solve the problem with their assertion is that they can have the Goldilocks zone. They don't grapple with VE capitalism with perpetual deferral of enjoyment, so they can produce a lost object over and over. The form of commodity requires perpetual dissatisfaction, which is what makes it constantly expansive. New kinds of resources like rare earth minerals, new markets like tech and crypto would always see you expand outwardly. It means that capitalism circumvents the aspect of restraining it because it has a psychical and logical expansion that only the all can solve by directly identifying the death drive rather than indirectly through the commodity. They say that we need to win the threat is fabricated. No, we don't. don't. It's important. Even if the threat is legitimate, our point is that they are caused by mutual paranoia and explanation. The APAC conspiracy has introduced into me throughout all of its ever. Russia, super AI, China, supervised engineered diseases, Middle East, and India. They are the paranoia. Remember that their war subjectivity is premised on refusal to know the unconscious. This is how they refuse. They attempt to say that there are barriers to our wholeness other than the lost object. That once these threats are mitigated, we will finally be whole. The Chinese other and tech competition appears to them as a barrier to the subject enjoyment, and violence becomes a cheap way of coping with the death threat that causes fascism and Cold War style lash out. The specific scenario for this is Africa. Our MBA evidence specifically cites rare earth minerals, chromium, platinum, gold, lithium, palladium, diamonds. MBA is also very specific U.S. competition with China and Africa. None of their evidence about resources being domestic and their cap sustainable cards aren't in the context of rare earth minerals. It's a TKO. Even if we lose the entire rest of the debate, it's a dishad. And hurts all their often causes escalatory wars with China over tech resources in Africa, which means that in order to solve the app, they cause war that turns the app, which is internal into extinction. This false ability to debate science bad doesn't matter. Subjects not reducible. Science like reduces subject and exterior human bodies and neurology shouldn't be applied to it. Doesn't tell us how to respond to injustice or motivate action, which means that it shouldn't be a metric for truth. Second is example in our right mind. Our best card in the debate, falsifiability, is a terrible right line that most science doesn't mean. Newtonian mechanics, modern physics, all of which are accepted as unequivocally true. Third is empirical true, falsifiability. All dropped examples of South energy and leaders of past proof you can scale up. It's true in the context of the app, which is done by the link debate. Fourth psychoanalysis bars from host academics, disciplines of policy, anthropology, linguistics, and math. Neither hard nor soft sciences suffice alone. Science is only produced by breaking traditional scientific methods, which means we internally turn their off and say they say that that they were proven eventually, but you can apply the same logic to psychoanalysis that might be viewed for false, views false under status quo science, but it would be proven with a new orientation towards science, which is all of our link arguments that it can be proven true in the future in the context of the app's own scenarios.
I believe it was 352. It's on the one close.
Yeah, that sounds right.
352.
Yeah, that sounds right.
352. Right.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. But we can go for that. No, they doesn't swamp now.
Mhm. Okay. I'll do it right after I do the true false. Cool. Okay. Did I not go? Oh, I not do this yet. Okay. Is anyone not ready?
Yeah.
Two issues are framing about. One, the entirety of the 2NR turns case analysis is in the context of U.S. lash out when that is not the scenario in the Kempe evidence. It is specifically in the context of how the EU, or how in the instance in which the U.S. economy would collapse, the EU economy would also collapse, which encourages Russian adventurism in the EU, which then escalated is not about U.S. involvement in those conflicts, but rather other countries that previously relied on the U.S. not going to conflict, which means all of their 2NR analysis and how they prevent the U.S. from lashing out does not apply. Also, if we win the psychoanalysis true false debate, all of that goes away, which we will, because the 2NR gets to that debate with 30 seconds left and only extends the Reitmeyer evidence, which is pretty bad. I'm going to do the psychoanalysis true false debate here. Psychoanalysis false, and the vast majority of studies confirm it can't be scaled up to explain human behavior. 2AC Paris post-states all of their studies and says that psychoanalysis isolates itself from other sciences, leading to studies that aren't credible. They're also based on clinical experience, which is anecdotal and unreliable. The Bunny substantiates issues are with psychoanalysis and says that psychoanalysis don't use labs or control groups or consider placebo effects. That sounds good in the sounds good in the 2NR, but all of their cards are terrible and don't have warrants in them. The 1AC McGowan evidence cards assume or already assume that psychoanalysis has been true without proving true without explaining why it is. The 1NR Reitmeyer evidence compares psychoanalysis to physics, which is wrong because physics can be proven in a lab, and also says Freud adapted his theory, but it still relied on anecdotal evidence, which we have said is bad. That's the 2AC Hilton evidence, which says that in the instance in which we have data proven in a lab, we should prefer that over anecdotes because it is better able to describe overall theories as opposed to anecdotes, which don't incorporate things like assuming placebo effects and are only specific to the instance in which the anecdote was used. The rest of the psychoanalysis true false debate, they say science is bad, prefer empirics. That's the Hilton evidence. I did that above. The 1NR Reitmeyer evidence was extended. I did that above. They said empirics prove that psychoanalysis is true. They did not cite those empirics, so you should not give it to them. The argument that other sciences like math cannot be falsified, but we're able to prove that math is true through things like experimentation. Obviously, through calculations, we're able to prove that certain math theories are true or false. And the last argument that psychoanalysis could be proven true in the future. If they prove it true in the future, then you believe it. But right now, as it stands, it has not been proven true, so you should not give it to them. On the framework debate or on the turns case stuff at the top, that only solves for the USA answered that above, and the leaders want to lose will continue to escalate conflict post case, which turns out requires them winning psychoanalysis, which they have not, which I did above. Framework or interpretations, you use consequentialism to weigh the affluence and competitive opportunity cost alternative that solves their links. They conceded that the alternative is theoretically illegitimate be under our framework because they fiat every single actor suddenly revokes desire and stops wanting to go to conflict. That's utopian. It makes being AF literally impossible. That's a reason why they don't meet our framework, even if they read links central to the thesis of the AF and an independent reason to reject the team. All the internal link debate, because it's massively unfair for the AF because they can fiat every single person doesn't go to conflict, which obviously we're never going to be able to generate offense against. All the internal link debating in the 1AR goes conceded. Forgoing the plan is a stasis and focusing debate on desire is infinitely regressive, vacuous, and unpredictable. It justifies word picks, viewing away massive structures like racism or capitalism, and Zach going to one word of one card and calling it a reason to vote neg because we couldn't define pain in 1AC cross-sex. It makes debate impossible. Zach says that there is a bright line established, but does not say what that bright line is. You should not give it to them. Two impacts. First is fairness. It's intrinsic good and an impact filter precedes and determines participation in the debate space and any value that debating can have. Second is criticism. There's a framing issue. We made a distinction between the procedure and content of debate. Content is wholly irrelevant, while procedure can actually generate iterative benefits. Content is irrelevant because debate does not shape subjectivities, and on the margins that it does, we link turn their offense. One is conceptions of worlds are pre-solidified going into debate. We've all done 18 years of interacting with family, friends, going to school, reading independent passionately, etc. One debate round isn't going to change our minds about psychoanalysis to make us rethink our desires. Second is that any marginal change in subjectivities under a model of unfair debate breeds antagonism and disagreement. Debate is a competitive activity that encourages rewriting blocks and comparing about how unfair a round was, not thinking about personal subjectivity. Over the course of the year, through a model of debate that's more fair and encourages active engagement between the affirmative and the negative, that decreases the dogmatic antagonism and allows us to foster critical skills from the iterative process of researching and debating. If they're right that psychoanalysis is true, we're much more likely to come to that conclusion outside of debate than within it, because we can actually read books that aren't constrained by competition or speech times. The 1AR, we explicitly conceded the 2NC argument about criticizing social authority being desirable. All the above proves that we access that significantly better. They also conceded the evidence on the psychoanalysis true-false debate about psychotherapy, not geopolitics, which is uniquely rational, since there's a wide variety of people who have different desires which make psychoanalysis irrelevant. We don't want China to launch nukes at us because it would kill it all. All the McGowan evidence, or all the examples in McGowan evidence, are smaller scale things, not things that would literally cause us. Or if we did and the link debate, this is the last thing I get to, because they haven't actually read a link to the plan. The Mbembe link is about resource extraction in countries like Africa. First, it's about China, which proves the link is thumped. But second, they have dropped that the REM mining scenario is specific to REM mining in the U.S., not other countries. This means we don't link to extractive colonialism. Even then, the Bailey evidence solves any residual offense because it is about things like REMs. Those are the 53 other commodities it says that 3D printing and resource reusal has solved, which means that there is no link to the AF. Even if there was, we've proven psychoanalysis isn't true. And even then, we reject them because they lost the object fiat to ban framework. It was a good debate.
Good debate.
You want a card, Doc?
Yeah, wait. Everything's relevant.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, it's been
Good debate.
Good debate.